This is Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, WEFT, Champaign, 90.1 on your FM dial. And
Dave on the board, and we had an extended version of the music that you hear at the beginning of the show. Those were all songs featuring Doc Watson. Got started with actually my personal favorite song from this album, Windy and Warm, that instrumental that started things. The traditional song we start the show with is Blue Railroad Train, and we even heard a little bit from the song Streamline Cannonball. All of those songs off of a compilation called The Vanguard Years, a one-disc attempt at summarizing the music of a really amazing guitarist, Doc Watson. He died almost exactly a year ago. It seems to me it was just about a year ago that he passed away. But anyway, so it's the music of Doc Watson, and happy Valentine's Day. This is February the 14th, 2016.
yes, happy Valentine's Day too. We last week extended the 6-minute Petcha Ketchu program a little bit, and I was thinking that we speak often about prairie, but we don't put too many. You don't get to see what the prairie is. So this week I've focused on photography because it's it gives you an idea of what is out there on the prairie, and David may have something to say about Petcha. He was wanting to say last week that all the programs were significant, and so he might like to add a comment about that.
Sure. Let's refresh people's memory. So Petcha is something that was invented by a couple of Europeans who were architects and still are in Japan. They realized that you could spend an awful lot of time listening to people go on and on and on and on about their architecture stuff. And they said, what if we just said, you don't even have 7 minutes to get it out and tell us what's up. So, so they came up with the concept of 20 in 20. You've got 20 slides to show people. And for each one of the slides, you've got 20 seconds to talk. Now, a lot of concepts take more than 20 seconds, so that means you put a couple of slides in that all apply to the same thing. And as the slides change on some subject, you keep talking and you give people maybe an entire minute of what's going on. And eventually people say, you know what, that's true beyond architecture. This could be applied pretty much anywhere. A lot of people just talk and talk and talk. And, and I'm guilty of this. I actually spent 45 minutes once talking about community radio, and that meant there was almost no time to actually talk with the class and get their feedback and find out what questions that they had. If I had reduced it to a Petcha, I'd have been done telling them about the radio station in 7 minutes, and we would have had the rest of the hour to talk about what they wanted to talk about and ask questions about. So at a Petcha, you've got, in this case, about a dozen people, and they each got 6 minutes and 40 seconds. That's 20 slides, 20 seconds per slide, to tell you about stuff. And this is a really cool concept. It's like WEFT. I always tell people, it's like a mantra. If you turn WEFT on and you don't like what you're listening to, give us an hour. It's going to be completely different. We don't have 2 consecutive shows that do the same thing. So just come back a little bit later, and it'll be completely different. And at this Petcha, you had about a dozen people all presenting things that they were passionate about. That's the one thing that they all had in common, where Dave is passionate about prairie and prairie preservation and rails to trails and greenways. These other people were passionate about being transparent and being a strong man, and how that's not the same as bodybuilding, and what it's like to only be 5 feet tall if you're a guy. It's unusual in our case. And what it's like to bicycle instead of driving in a car, and you don't get to choose what these people are going to talk about. It's like turning on WEFT. You're conceding what you're going to hear to who's on the air at WEFT. If you go to a Petcha, you're saying, okay, you toss stuff my way, and I'm going to listen to it, and it doesn't matter if I don't happen to be particularly passionate about what somebody says. 6 minutes and 40 seconds later, they're done, and we'll be on to the next person, and you're bound to hear a lot of things that you're bound to like, especially if you're listening to this. If you can put up with the transient nature of what you hear on WEFT, you're probably a fan of a Petcha, even if you've never even known that. We should point out that the views and opinions expressed are solely those of the speakers. But yes, I had a great time. Everybody had their own style. One person went so far as to say he was going to give us the drunk person's perspective on being a strong man. Being a strong man includes being able to pull small jet planes across the tarmac and things like that. And so his way of getting comfortable was by enjoying an adult beverage or two before he got on stage. And if that's not your thing, well, guess what? He was not the last person, and you got to hear a woman talking about what it's like to bicycle exclusively throughout Champaign-Urbana. And lots of people. It's been an extra week now, so I don't even remember everything that everybody talked about. I'll just say that it was great fun being in the audience. I knew one of the acts, as it were, by heart, because I'd worked with Dave to put his slides together, and I heard him do his presentation a couple of times. But it was still great fun to hear all these other folks go up there. Ralph Rother is a former Wefty. He used to be on the air once in a while, and he used to edit the Weft Review. And he was the person talking about what it's like to be diminutive. So I'll say one more time, the phrase is spelled, it looks like Pechakucha. It's pronounced in Japanese, Pachakacha. And if you see one of these is coming up, we've had 20 of them in Champaign-Urbana so far. If you see one of these and you've got a few dollars to spare, it doesn't cost that much. It sounds like they usually charge a little bit for you to get in. But, if you've got a couple of hours to spare in an evening, you're bound to be at least entertained, and maybe you'll be informed as well. And that's it for me.
Okay, well, in there, we constantly talk about Prairie, and we show perhaps 3 slides of Prairie, so that doesn't really give you an idea of what a prairie is like. So this week we had reproduced the program we did on Pachakacha and extended it a little bit and put a few more meaningful pictures in. And so that went up on YouTube yesterday, and it's I put the link to it. Do you have it on your file? No,
I sure don't. If people,
it comes up in blue, and so it doesn't print in black.
Yes, if people simply go to YouTube.com and type in the Prairie Monk, they will find episodes of the videos. It still strikes me as a strange concept. We're making a video of a 1-hour radio program. Well, because of the video aspect, we actually go behind the scenes, and this is a truism. I've talked with David Gans and some other folks. If you've got a 1-hour program, you can expect to spend at least 3 hours editing it into something that you're willing to have out there for other people to experience. So we're going to spend some time after the show putting slides in to go with today's program. And likewise, we took Dave's Pachakacha from a little bit over a week ago, and we dropped it into last week's episode of this here program. So if you go to youtube.com, type in The Prairie Monk, you'll see a bunch of episodes of videos of Dave's program, enhanced in this case with, we must have at least 30 slides, I suppose, we put into last week's show. So instead of merely being, a talking head, you'll actually get to see lots of prairie and all the other things that Dave talked about at his Pachakacha, and a couple of other things. There's a book that he talked about, and we've put in a picture of the book and everything like that. So, yeah, go to YouTube and look for The Prairie Monk. You'll probably be entertained. You'll probably pick up something you don't get from just listening to him for the 1 hour on the radio.
So, thinking about that, I thought we might, this week, add something behind the program that has helped into action with Urbana Public Television. It goes up on public television twice a week, on Friday at noon, 1 o'clock, and Tuesday on about 6 o'clock. And you can get that from their schedule. But they also put that up on YouTube. And this week, I thought we might add some visuals behind the YouTube for the radio program converted to television. They're both 1-hour programs, but with YouTube you can extend the friendship and put pictures behind. So I thought we might add that. But it was very much a picture week, and I'll run through some of the things we do because it sort of suggests to you what environmentalists get involved with and what they do and how it works out. With regard to pictures, we had a very nice camera club showing in Lincoln Square. But it reminds me that often we don't get to see flat images anymore. We see them on our computer, we see them on our cell phone. They're brief. Their quality has increased. You can take 25 pictures of a duck in a pond, and the one that you want is one of those 25 pictures, so you can delete. If you did that with regular film, it would cost you enormously to print those pictures. Journalists would do it, but these days everyone can do that. So you have the chance to get a good picture that way. You also have a increase in a pixel rate, which gives you quality. The cameras themselves have improved. So beside pixel rate, you have chromatic aberration, and the quality of the lens has been improved. So you can take some rather wonderful photographs, and that camera show is full of those sort of images. I was impressed. I talked to people, asked them questions, found some people who had exhibit pictures in there, who were excited. So there was quite a little crowd coming through to look and enjoy. The categories ran to architecture, animals, people, nature, general, and manipulated, useful ones, and black and white. All those pictures had special awards, and it just, the quality is very nice, especially the nature ones. I enjoyed capturing images that we might never capture before, because we can get into microscopes and other equipment that we didn't have, that took technology previously. Let me say something about the camera club. It meets twice a month, and it has had a lot of energy from previous Urbana Mayor Hiram Paley and his family, and a whole bunch of other people there in the camera club. And they have a nice brochure which has images that are done by the camera club as distinct from the people who are exhibiting in the competition. The competition is annual, and it's supported by Lincoln Square, which gives space, and the Park District, Urbana Park District, Janet Salisbury has a lot to do with putting this together, usually, and of course sponsors, and you need judges. So the judges are Larry Canfer, Craig Monagill, and Brian Stauffer, and then there are sponsors like the News Gazette and other people that involved include Larry Canfer himself as a sponsor. He was also a judge. Busey Bank, Art Coop, Trophy Time, Picture Lab, and all those people come together to make this possible, and they give speeches about why they chose what picture, and overall, very, very exciting. I especially remember one black and white film where there was a railroad line that was curling around as you would normally not curl a railroad line, and I impressed with that. And then all these others that are just so wonderful that you want to go back 2 or 3 times and have a look. So the show is on from the 13th, which was yesterday, through the 21st. And I think you should take a brief visit to Lincoln Square. You can go walk around the square if you want for exercise, and you can go to the farmer's market. I was there at farmer's market, and I talked to people there. But just conversing with people I knew and didn't know was interesting. And we have to think that many of these pictures won't get to be preserved because the cost of making a paper image is high, and so a lot of our images are digital. And I just was recently to a meeting of the Champaign City Council, and they have documents and pictures that go back to the 1850s, and they were just deciding to give their staff the go-ahead to archive, but to archive in a non-digital form, because we're all somewhat afraid that in 25 years you will have gone through 2 or 3 more changes in technology, and you will never be able to get access to some of the pictures that are wonderful that are being taken now. So you have to think about those sorts of things. I went to the co-op while I was there, and I met up with Norma and Herbert Marder, and they have a son, a grown son, who's been doing visual material associated with a Society for the Preservation of Endangered Language. But endangered language also includes pictures. So he has pictures of people who have obviously come from an African or a European background that is totally different from where they are now. It may be someone who has a Celtic background on Normandy, a part of France, that is transported to another country and does not really fit. So these people have a foot in two countries. I can vouch for that myself. I was on the phone last night and to my brother's people in Australia, and we were talking about kangaroos coming into town. It's a little bit like having a raccoon coming into town here, or a coyote. The animals are coming in closer to town, especially if they don't have habitat outside of town, like we have cornfields and soybeans, and that doesn't necessarily activate every natural animal that's out there. So they come in and looking for garbage and whatnot. So Yuri Marder has been taking photographs that are associated with language, and they have has a physicist brother who is interested in the world at large and how it will survive, and some of the things that are of concern. Like I listened to the Commonwealth Club last night, and their program was oriented to younger people knowing what the consequences of nuclear power can be concerned, what could happen with a powerful bomb like the ones that were dropped on Japan. It seems that the younger generation is interested in different things, but they may have to be reminded about some things that are beyond one era. So then, let me see what I have here. Oh, I know what we did. I went to a fire symposium, and I won't say too much about the fire symposium because I have the offer of one of the organizers to come to WEFT and say something about fire. The Fire Symposium is a statewide organization. It's concerned about prescribed burns, and one of the things that was impressive was that they've been documenting how much people burn their prairies, and how do they burn them, and what is the result. Prairies have been subjected to lightning fire for a long time, and that was picked up by Indians, so they could use the fire to create a hunting opportunity. If you make a horseshoe of fire, the animals come out the front end of the horseshoe, and you can hunt that way. But they also realized that once they burned the prairie, it was so used to being for that to be happening. They have adapted over the years. So if you don't burn a prairie, you can see the plants like big bluestem lowering and lowering, and the prairie weakens. So if we do not burn, then we're going to have weaker prairies and lose certain species. If we burn too much, then the species that don't like to be burned are going to disappear too. So there's a need for research and organization. And one of the questions I had actually at the photographic exhibition was, how can I get involved with burning? Well, it's quite a little talent goes to that. It's one of these things where you have hurry up and wait. So you might be burning a little bit of prairie, and then all of a sudden it takes off. You have to be very careful. You have to have very good fire breaks. You have to have sufficient water. Some people burn a prairie with one person, which it takes a lot of talent and knowledge to do that. Sometimes it can be accidental. If you're a farmer for years, you've been putting a match in the drainage ditch, then that's how it goes. But there's much more to it than that. And so you have to know the weather situation, whether there's too much wind or not enough wind. If you have a middle of the growing season burn, which is an alternative, then it may not burn fast enough to get rid of invasive weeds. So you have to know about that, and you have to have enough physical strength to be able to wait while the fire does things slowly, and then all of a sudden, if it takes off, you're after it with a flapper, and you're trying to put it out, and that requires a lot of energy. You have to have water. You have to have clothing that's not plastic that'll burn, and so there's a technique. And so some of these things were being discussed. Some counties were discussing their way of doing things, setting up crews, burn leaders, and crews gradually over the years, say 25 years, acquiring equipment, which might include a four-wheeler that can go over the terrain with water, to have a source of water where you don't normally have water laid on, to be able to burn in between houses, between city places. You have to think about these things. And then you have researchers that have been for 35 years researching things like Funk's Grove. So there's Roger Anderson, who has been at Bloomington researching prairie forests and the relationship between one and the other for many years, which reminds me that the next North American Prairie Conference is not going to be in Texas or in Winnipeg. It's going to be right here in Bloomington, and you should know about that. I don't have the date right on me. I might have. It's sometime in September, I think. Let me quickly look.
Really good opportunity for me to jump in and say, don't forget, you're listening to WEFT Champaign 90.1 FM. We are community radio for East Central Illinois, and while you're looking for September in your date book.
I don't. We have
If you want to hand it
lots
to me,
of
I
time
can,
to get that.
Please,
But
it
remember
won't be
that
till
it's
September.
there. So also talking to people is helpful. And so fire was something we get involved in. We have a lake park, Prairie, which is about 2.5 acres, which received a lot of its plants from the widening of Route 45, adjacent to the railroad between Windsor Road and Curtis. And to burn that and to burn it well involves a lot of grassed areas that are fire breaks, and so we might include a record of that. We made an application for the Urbana Arts grants, and we're concerned again about including history that is not always known about, trying to preserve railroad beds for prairie, for trails, and for re-rails in some cases. So being able to put that together was helpful. We may not make it because Urbana has a very limited amount of money to spread around for the arts, and obviously they would like to give preference to Urbana people, although we provide opportunities for Urbana. The Kickapoo Trail, which will run out from Urbana to Danville, is a case in point. And so we'll hope. Then we had a Boneyard participant event. It was called a mingle. And the 40 North, which is basically the Champaign-Urbana Arts Council, has had an interesting gallery opportunity. It is in where Verizon have moved out of the Champaign telephone. It's on Neal Street South and opposite Hessel Boulevard. And a nice little gallery there, and on Thursday night, vendors and artists were asked to get together. So there's a little note from Melissa Murley, who's the art reporter for the News Gazette, and Mike Hosier is the owner of that building, and he called up 40 North and said, "Would you like to have a gallery?" Wow! Oh yes! So they have gallery of local people, and she very much says that Mike should be thanked for that, Mike Hosier. So we met there, we talked there, Charlie Wisman has been awarded the picture that will be the picture that will go in places like buses and will advertise the Boneyard event. So he had a couple of pictures there. There were other artists hanging on the wall and other artists hanging around talking to each other and interesting food. So that sort of thing brings people together. The vendors were people who have artwork that would like to display their artwork but don't have someone to sponsor them. I think Doug Olive will be bringing pictures to WEFT and perhaps other people too. We've had quite nice art shows at WEFT at Boneyard time. So that was a get-together thing. The indoor farmers market is still struggling along. It takes years to establish something like a market after the Christmas and New Year's activity. So they're trying and have tried for probably 3-5 years to have a continuing art event or a booth event. The produce people have to drop out because they don't have a lot of produce after a certain time, unless they have greenhouses. And I talked to Carrie some. Carrie has apples and fruit, and they have a Southern Illinois farm that produces a lot of the vegetables that come to the farmers market outdoors. Once you get indoors, it gets fewer and fewer, and so the Blue Moon and others that bring produce to the market drop off. The thing about greenhouses is that they can allow vegetables like kale to grow earlier in the season or later in the season. But those greenhouses cost $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, and it's not easy to go through that investment, which means that your product has to be a little higher price. So you have to figure on that if you're going to the farmer's market. I was talking to people who are harvesting autumn olives and putting them into jam and selling. They have a little problem with environmentalists who are not very excited by autumn olives. They are a very invasive tree, but they actually help us because what happens is they harvest the seed crop, which can stay around for years and years, and then we take down the tree afterwards. And so once again, this is just moseying around and talking to people, and I had an enjoyable Saturday late morning and early afternoon just doing this. I can take recycled boxes to the Books for Prisoners, where when they have their sales, they can hand you a box to take your books. And so that means I go to the Independent Media Center and talk to those folk. So what I'll try to do now is suggest to you that we'll give you an idea of what sort of plants might you find on a prairie. Let's go, for instance, to a gravel pit at Rantoul. This is a gravel pit that was used. It was on the Bloomington Moraine, and the Bloomington Moraine leaves a lot of glacial till. And it's actually rather good for road, putting on roads. It's a sort of road pack. And so it has been a gravel pit, probably about 8 feet deep. But around the edges, the prairie has remained where it was. And it's adjacent to what used to be an interurban railroad line, and then again very near to the main line railroad, and both of those railroad corridors have preserved remnant prairies. So we have a rough idea of what was a prairie in the 1820s when settlers came, and we try to replicate that without bringing too much seed of one type. If you have people who are helping you, like a high school class, and you have them pick your seed in September, you can very easily end up spreading a September prairie. So you have to be careful to pick across the seasons. You have to know how to activate some of these seeds. Some of the seeds are designed to stay around for years and years, so you have to know little techniques like if you have New Jersey tea, you put them in hot water to take out a little of the tannin, which sort of preserves them, and you can stratify them and put them into refrigerators so they have a feeling of going through a winter. There's some moisture and there's some cold and there's some warmth perhaps. So you activate those seeds. That means that you don't have to wait 50 years for the seed to decide to be leached enough to take off. You are inspiring some here and now growth. Other seeds, especially legume seeds, you might like to scoriate them so that they will take in moisture. That area needs to be burned because sometimes the seed that's there will burst because of burning. So let's look at some of the plants that we bring across from the railroad bed. First of all, there are the Sylveons, the compass plant. We talk about it a lot, and so we'll have a photograph of a compass plant. It has a big taproot, and it is very much a drought-resistant plant. Its leaves face north and south, so the sun doesn't boil the water out of the leaves, but that north and south juxtaposition of the leaves gives you an idea that settlers could find north and south. Otherwise, humans have a strange mind when they've gone 100 miles in a prairie and they don't have anything to go by that's north and south, then they're back home on their stoop. So that's just how our brains work, but it was very handy to have this compass plant, which is hairy, it's hard, it's resinous, and it has all the characteristics of a drought-resistant plant. Its counterpart is a prairie dock, which is a little bit more refined, but also has a deep root. And so we pick that seed and distribute it, but sometimes we have a hard time picking that seed because there's a weevil that gets into the flower, and it's like prairies have their own fleas and lesser fleas, and so ad infinitum. We have to try and battle with the prairie's own creatures, and that's part of the ecosystem. There's another Sylveon which is called rosinweed, and it doesn't have a deep root. It has a lot of sideways roots. And if we dig it up, a mature plant, we can put shovels under every side, and then we give a heft, and up comes a rosinweed, a mature plant that we can plant rather than just seed. So we sometimes transplant plants. Some plants, like hoary puccoon, you can't really easily transplant because you have to know what ant is fertilizing this plant, what creature is its associate, and so we look to encourage those sorts of plants on sort of habitat that they would like, but it's not always possible. So in the fall we may have teams of people picking, but we also have people like Ron Sleater from Decatur who come and pick certain asters or plants that they know are prairie plants that have a hard time being distributed. The birds and the bees will help. The original soil that is around the gravel pit will help. At the moment, emerald ash borer is taking out trees that were planted on the original soil. There was going to be a couple of roads. There was going to be a split highway, but the transportation people decided to put in Route 57 So that didn't happen. So trees were planted on this still viable second road, which didn't get built. And you can see the emerald ash borer gradually moving around the ash trees. And where the sunlight gets in, the prairie plants grow. We don't go over there with boots and pick up disease that can be transplanted elsewhere. So we try to avoid going to that forested area. And if we do go to it, we try to wash off afterwards to make sure that we're not transmitting that disease to ash trees everywhere. But there is a balance between the prairie. In this case, it was mostly prairie. The only trees really were deep-rooted cottonwood trees that could go down into the aquifer and survive that way. There's a nice little old road there. It goes through a cemetery. The cemetery has history. And the vegetation grows. Once you drain an area, the crud trees or fast-growing trees that are invasive do just that. They invade. And the cemetery has bought a plot of 6 acres of ground for an increased area. And so we look at that Bloomington moraine from very wet at the outset. You have to imagine a glacier sitting on the top of this Bloomington moraine and gradually dropping rock and rubble there for perhaps 1,000 years, and the water running off. So we have a surface area that includes wetland, then mesic land where the gravel pit is, and then up on the hill where there's a lot of loess where when glaciers retreated, they left very finely ground material that blew across the country. The heavier material would drop out first, and then the lighter material would provide an interesting habitat on the top of the moraine, which is rather dry. And so the species are different, but there's an old Route 45, a concrete road that goes from Rantoul to Paxton. And we hope that old highway could be reinstituted as a prairie trail that would go up over the Bloomington moraine and down to Ludlow, then up north till the next moraine is the Paxton moraine. And that has a cemetery on it that is has been not tended in recent years, and it is alive with prairie. And so we take you in there, and perhaps we'll find not just the grasses. There'll be the 4 or 5 major grasses: big blue stem Indian grass, little blue stem, cordgrass in lower spots, and there are other grasses too, switchgrass especially. We don't encourage too much switchgrass because it can be a little on the aggressive side, but it stays up over winter and allows pheasants and prairie chickens and other creatures to survive. We don't have too many prairie chickens left. The population has gone from being able to catch 1,000 prairie chickens in the area around here near Fisher and the likes, sending them off to Chicago to be eaten. And we're down to such a small number of prairie chickens that we've had to go to Missouri to replenish that genetic pool. And that's kind of sad. And we keep losing these sort of little prairie places. Let me look at another aspect of this where we can drop in a picture or two. There are legumes, and one is a baptisia or a false indigo. It is probably gets about 3 or 4 feet high. It has wonderful green pods on it. It has white flowers. The florists actually will gather it and sell it. Not that we encourage that, but it's a spectacular plant. It's a legume, so it has all the rhizobacteria that we would think to encourage legume growth. And these pods gradually become rather dark and black. And inside there are a little row of seeds that are yellow, and it's exciting to go to a pod and see. You have to be fairly fast before the fall insect population has decided that this is good protein, and they get into those seed pods and take out the seeds. So once again, we're looking at an ecosystem. There is purple clover and white clover, and these plants all have deep roots. If I get someone to dig up a clover plant, which we seldom do, then you know that the roots are about 4 feet deep. And these are plants that will be picked by deer, because the deer also knows that they are valuable food sources. So you have to know, if you have a deer population where you have 20 or 30 deer in a crowd and they're almost starving, then you have to be bothered about that population taking out your legumes. And you might have to, the state actually has an open house for bow hunting in the fall, and then they bring in professional people to reduce that deer population so that they're not starving and they're not diseased, and the population is more in balance with what you would have thought that things would have been in the 1820s. We can only surmise, and the thing is that you don't know when a storm comes through or a fire comes through and can change the dynamics. So we're only guessing, and we're doing the best we can to give you the opportunity to see a little of your heritage vegetation. There are coneflowers. There are purple coneflowers and there are yellow coneflowers. The echinacea, which is the purple coneflower, is there, and it grows well on the glacial till. It's like almost regrowth succession. And in its peak flowering time, it can send you nuts because it looks interesting and it's there and it has a survival mode, and just the character is interesting. And then there's a Ratibida type yellow coneflower. Coneflower just means that the petals face back. So if you put your arms down towards your hips, then the petals fall like that. And so you have to know that yellow coneflower or gray-headed coneflower, because the heads of the seed rachis just look like a gray-headed gentleman. So gray-headed coneflower or yellow coneflower is a diplomat. It grows very well in its third and fourth year, and then as other creatures and other plants begin to fill in the areas, then the yellow coneflowers are fewer. And gradually you start to see little areas of soil begin to grow and provide a place for other plants like quinine. So quinine has the element of a chemical in it that reminds us that many of these plants have not been tapped for their biochemicals that we may need in the future. So there's quinine. It's used in malaria treatment. But then you have Rattlesnake Master, and Rattlesnake Master will grow quickly and almost be invasive if you have the right creatures or pollinators that are associated with it. Otherwise, it can be regarded as rather rare. And so looking at these plants, we gradually acquire an ecosystem, and gradually the soil goes back to what you have after 6,000 years of since glaciation moved north and left us with a moraine and an outwash plain, so that you have wet species like cordgrass growing in places like Flatville that were drained for farmland, wonderful soils. So the richest soils, the Drummer and the Flanagan soils, are there on the flatlands. And then we gradually move into mesic areas, and you are near a cemetery, so you know that there are dried arrangements that come into the cemetery that often have invasive plants, and we have one murderous plant which is called teasel, and we have to get rid of that teasel. So then you have to think about whether you are going to herbicide it or you're going to cut it off. It's so aggressive that you almost have to use some sort of glyphosate herbicide to get rid of it. And then you have to surveil your territory, because when it comes to be a fall day when it's nice and moist and there's a little creek that runs off the moraine, we have this palmate draining system that eventually runs into a major river, and that we have one of those little creeks that comes through our gravel pit prairie, and wow, it's the sort of thing that four-wheel vehicles love to get into and screw around with. So you can do 70 years of damage in 20 minutes. So you have to be there enough. You have to have a fence. You have to have signs that are costly to keep this sort of thing operating. So on Route 45, we have widening road. It went from 2 lanes to 3 lanes to 5 lanes, and we got a front-end loader and moved a lot of that prairie with the aid of a grant to a 2.5 acre prairie at Lake Park. So we may be giving you a little program after YouTube that will be just a few of the fall prairie. I've looked at it and I've thought, do I put names on for you? And I think at the outset, no, we just throw these pictures so that you know the wonder of a prairie. And so this would be our first attempt to give you more of the visual side of a prairie. If you go to Lake Park, you can see the grasses. Not too many grasses. It's easy to grow the grasses, so we don't really encourage them too much. It's the broadleaves we're interested in. So we'll walk you through a prairie, and as it grows 6, 8, and 10 feet tall, there's some compass plants that we brought in there from the pumpkin vine in Dewey Fisher area, and we dug them up with a backhoe, and some of them, the top crown of the compass plant was 10 inches across, and the root was about 2 feet deep. At that stage, it was still 3 inches across. We broke it off, and the old root will regrow in Fisher. The new root has grown in that prairie, and some of those plants, the fruiting bodies are like 10 feet tall, and so we're coming to the end of our program. It always goes faster than I would like. It's fun to do, and we hope that we'll give you some visual opportunity with the credential to Urbana Public Television for letting us do this and encouraging us to add a visual element to the radio element, which you also have to thank WEFT for doing. And when we do that, we have to remind you that the facilities we're using do require expenditure. And if you have a sense of responsibility to this sort of thinking and this sort of talking, then you might want to contribute a small amount to the WEFT radio station, and it's especially to its community involvement side of things. So I think with that I'll say this has been Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, WEFT Champaign, 90.1 on your FM dial.
And Dave on the board.
And a happy Valentine's Day.
Since there's nobody pushing us out the door here, let me quickly ask you a question. You've mentioned two of the prairies that are not too far from here. If people make the pilgrimage up to Rantoul, they can see the Pope Prairie. And if they go much closer to here, down to Savoy, if they go to the residence area called Lake Park, there's a prairie there. What would people see this time of year? I mean, above the...
Wonderful. The plants are belted down by ice and snow and wind, but they're all there, and the litter is accumulating. And every once in about 3 to 5 years, we will burn that litter. And so you can walk around the trail and you can see all these plants. If you want to recognize a compass plant, it will have an elephant ear-sized leaf, but it's all invaginated, so that it drops off the pores, the breathing pores, so it doesn't dry out. Its mate, the prairie dock, will have an entire leaf, and you can feel the sides of it, and it's rough and tough at this time of the year, but in summer it's cool because it sort of acts like a water bag. As the wind blows by, it's cooling the plant.
Okay, so folks could actually experience the prairie if they go out there this time of year. It may be dormant, it may not be blossoming, and there won't be any flowers or anything like that, but you could see the plants, and if you go out again in the summertime, you will clearly see the contrast between the two.
You'll see things like rose hips will stay, and they'll actually be very orange.
Alrighty, so there you go, and again, the Lake Park Prairie is not that very far away. Lake Park, is that the name of the actual community
just
down there?
South of Curtis Road, on First Street.
And it's public land.
The Pope Prairie at Rantoul is just about a mile north of Rantoul on Old Route 45.
If you go north,
out around the cemetery.
Right, called Maple something or something.
Maple Grove Cemetery.
Yeah.
You can go through the cemetery to an old road at the back. And that old road goes all the way to Paxton. We'd like to reactivate that.